going. The last thing I need is to have to go home and do this again. Sound is working. There we go. Let's mute that because we don't need me to echo. Oh, crud. I didn't have the... I didn't even have it open. Let's see. Alright. There's some folks. Okay. So, oh, should probably go ahead and pull this up. Morning. This is where we ended last time, based on the video that I checked. Any questions from any of you guys before we get started? As a reminder, we will, unless, I don't know, the building catches on fire, we'll be finishing the chapter today. So the study guide will be on Wednesday, and then next week we'll do our first test. So the study guide, I should have put it on Blackboard this weekend. If not, I'll make sure that I put it up. And then we'll go over it on Wednesday to make sure we're all on the same page. And then next Monday will be the test. And for all my online folks, I will be putting the study guide, the test up on Blackboard. You have to use, I'm sure most of you have had my class before. You have to use the Respondus lockdown browser to access it. You're also going to need to have access to a webcam so that I can make sure you're actually sitting and doing the thing and not, looking up all the answers over your phone and whatnot. So make sure you have all that squared away. And for online people, the test will be up a week. However, try to get it done as soon as possible, because if you wait until Sunday night to do it, Blackboard's going to be on fire. So try to get it done early. Otherwise, you might be out of luck. Okay. That's all I can think of at the moment. We still have about a month before the first paper is due. Let me check again real quick on here. As far as dates, because actually I was hoping spring break would be the week of time change, but unfortunately it's not. It's the week after. It's the week of St. Patrick's Day, so it's the 15th through, 16th to the 20th. So for us, the first paper is due on the 11th of March. Just FYI. Right. So, let's continue on with this. We ended with this last time, discussed the mansions and whatnot that the rich elites were building. So, Biltmore, if you've ever been, surely most of us have been there. It's right up there in Asheville, North Carolina. I got a bunch of pictures of that. Because again, when I was teaching this originally, I was upstate. So most of the people had been there. As opposed to being to the beach. Like, for them, the beach was this, fancy exotic thing. It's like, being used to being an hour from the beach, it's whatever. Opera houses, Metropolitan Opera House in New York, which, as I said, was rebuilt in the 60s. So the Met today is not technically this original Metropolitan Opera House, but it was built kind of as a refurbishment of this one. And then I just had a couple of extra things here, digital newspapers and whatnot, because we had middle class stuff, um, comfortable mass-produced furniture, magazines, newspaper, fiction, etc., and the various um, organizations that help to deal with the problems of industrialization. As I said last time, and we'll get into more here in just a second on the next slide, industrialization was really a really difficult shift for humanity as a whole, because we've been farmers for literally tens of thousands of years, like as far back as we have human civilization, and to go from kind of working with the patterns of nature, sun up to sun down, you don't work in the winter because nothing grows during the winter, to you're working the factories from a certain part of the day to a certain part of the day, no matter what time of year, period. And obviously working in a factory, as I've shown you guys from those previous pictures, wasn't super pleasant. Not to say that farm work was easy and lovely, but I mean, I'd rather be surrounded by, horse crap than machines that are trying to eat me. So, you know, there were shifts in gender roles. Of course, for women, they were expected to do more in the households. There were colleges for young women. This is seen as a way to provide refinement as opposed to giving women an education to get a career. They were meant to be, well, I'll put it here. A physician at the time, I think I've got this gentleman's name. Nope, just says one physician. They didn't call him out. One physician summed up the thought at the time: women could only use their brains, quote, but little and in trivial matters, and should concentrate on serving as the companion or ornamental appendage to man. So yeah, late 1800s, not exactly super progressive when it came to women. Oh, there's Kellogg cornflakes. We'll talk about that later. Of course, though, with the shift in consumer culture from, again, the farms where you made most of what you needed, and if you couldn't make it, you would just trade it with your neighbors who would typically be making different things, to you now run a household and you go into town to buy the stuff. Women are becoming more a part of the consumer culture. They, would purchase food. They would be in charge of the entertainment, be that when the radio, especially when radios come about, or just even the reading material that was the entertainment of the day. Clothes, of course. But as a worker, because women were starting to work at this time, most of their jobs were service jobs. Hairdressers, store clerks, the sort of things that kind of kept them hidden away from the public eye. Not really, not in positions of power, if you will. There were no women business tycoons, obviously. That was simply not allowed. Now, women who did have some level of economic independence, which is to say more wealthy white women, did have access to some amount of leisure sports. However, once again, this was seen as a way to offset the stresses of an intellectual life, so those that were able to go to college to become, quote, more well-rounded women were doing these leisure sports as a way to, once again, become, more well-rounded. I kind of got ahead of myself there. Refinement, more well-rounded. Anyway, regardless, this was all meant to prepare a woman for her life as a wife and housemaker, like nothing else. There was no preparing for some career outside of the home. The hairdresser and store clerk thing, that was just sort of like a secondary side job they could do, but at any time could be whisked away to go back home and just do that. As far as men's leisure, some men join social clubs like the Oddfellows, Masons, etc., to have some sort of a masculine social environment. I'll get to that in a second. They would play a number of physical sports to deal with this crisis of masculinity. Experienced by middle-class men who no longer work for themselves. Once again, going back to the farm thing. Before, when everybody owned a farm, or at least worked a farm, because owning the farm is a bit more rare. But, like, even in the Middle Ages, if you were a peasant and you worked on a manor under some lord, you were still technically working for yourself. The lord wasn't walking around micromanaging what you were planting. And it was your work, your grit that made the ground profitable. But now you're just a cog in a machine among thousands of other cogs in the machine to run this factory to make a few dollars a week, while the guy sitting at the top is making millions. And again, millions in that day, so billions today. Which led to this, quote, crisis of masculinity, because, oh no, we're not in charge of our own destinies. This thing also, the social clubs, I worked with a guy who was in the Freemasons. It's not some, like, secretive, super scary elite club. It's just a place where bored old men go to drink and gossip. Like, that's all it is. The whole, like, oh, they're ruling the world, that's just, it's just rumors and paranoia, and the Masons probably push that a little bit to seem more important than they are, because genuinely, the guy that I worked with was not someone that you would trust to be in that level of organization. I described it as like a bar, but with you had to be in the club to go to that bar. Like, that's all it was. My uncle, for example, is part of the Elks Club, which is in Florence, and it's just a bar. It's just a bar, but you have to be in the club to go there. That's all it is. That's all these were. But specifically at this time, it was for men to come together and have, manly company, because unlike when you're working the farm or working, ships, loading stuff in the docks, you were just doing menial, boring labor. It wasn't even physically intensive. It was just mentally wearing you out. And so we have one final example here. Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes was written in this period, 1912. So this story is very old, which was the idea of the primitive manhood against the vices of becoming over-civilized, whatever that means. Obviously the Disney adaptation is going to take some liberties with that. But the original telling of it, it is sort of preserved in the Disney adaptation of, like, this idea of this ape man isn't like inferior to civilized man, because he's got his own pros and cons, when the people who come into the jungle to explore are like bumbling idiots and don't know what they're doing. I'm going to get to that again in just a moment as well. So, we have women's clubs, these various social gatherings, obviously totally normal things happening in this image here. just gals being pals, as one might say. Um, this real weird ad for this stove. Um, like at first you look at it as like, oh wow, this is really freaking racist. But then you see the white people are also drawn like horrible mutant cartoon characters. So I don't know. This isn't nice to anybody. The only thing that's drawn normal is the stove. Everything outside the stove is horrible and mutated. So I don't know. Even the turkey's weird. Or I guess that's a turkey. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Leisure sports. This is a great image because it's got a dog in it. Dogs are important. I guess this was kickball or maybe soccer. It's not specifically a soccer ball, but you don't necessarily need a soccer ball to play soccer. If you're just, having fun. Although, yeah, this is the image. If you've ever played or even just seen lacrosse, this isn't a dainty sport. This is also, I think field hockey and lacrosse are slightly different. This is a full contact sport. This is a sport where people get hurt, and they are wearing exactly no safety equipment whatsoever. This isn't any kind of, oh, this is a womanly. No, I don't. But I found this for this era of images, so yeah. There you go. Oh, so as far as the masculinity of the day, I found this really great image of what I consider probably the most 19th century man I've ever seen. This guy. This is a prize fighter. This was bare knuckle boxing. This literally, you would have the pants with a little sash. And you would just go in and beat the hell out of each other. But, you can tell, like, the sides of his head are shaved, his hair is short because, typically in bare knuckle boxing, you're not going to be grappling, but you don't want to have hair to grab. He's still got the mustache because it's the 1800s. Got a little bit of body hair going on because, again, dude in the 1800s. Pretty typical dude. Pretty typical. He's built pretty broad. He's not like ripped like you'd see in more modern like movie stars, because that's not actually strength. That's just dehydrating yourself to show the muscles better. This is actually, to use the quote, this is what peak performance looks like. Like this is what a person who is strong looks like. Now, this compared to, interestingly enough, this was one of the first, I don't think this was the original, but one of the first covers for Tarzan and the Apes. What do we notice about Tarzan compared to Punch Face here? True. Yeah, again, they're not like you can see every muscle in their body. In fact, Tarzan's got a little bit of ripples going on there, because you're living in the jungle, man. You're not doing sit-ups all day. But what differences do you notice between Tarzan and this guy? Tarzan ain't got nothing for hair other than on his head. Like long hair, which again, he's living in the jungle, I get that. Like I'm not going to expect Tarzan to have a clean cut hair. But why is he like a Olympic swimmer when it comes to everything else? How does one get waxed in the jungle? That's weird. Now, I can't think of one reason why Tarzan looks like that. The majority of people reading books at the time were women. I'm just saying. This might have been to sell copies. If you've ever seen any of the weird, like, romance novel covers, it's this, but more oiled. Romance novel covers are borderline explicit. Okay, so anyway, that's that. Unfortunately, we got to go from teasing Tarzan to far less amusing things. It was the Jim Crow era. Obviously, when it came to black Americans in the South, they were facing all sorts of barriers when it came to voting and existing. There were poll taxes, which meant that if you were poor, you couldn't vote. And considering like 99% of black Americans in the South were either freed slaves or descendants of freed slaves, therefore they started with nothing, and the laws down here, continued to prevent them from gaining any meaningful wealth. Yeah, they stayed in poverty. And then there are also literacy tests, which, again, not that we've ever had great education down here, but especially back then, and especially for certain groups of people that the individuals in government didn't want to vote. If you can't read, you can't vote. However, there was a grandfather clause that went back to 1860, which meant that if you can't read, but your grandfather in 1860 could read, then you're allowed to vote. Where would the majority of black grandfathers have been in 1860? Exactly. And none of them, barring like a very few examples, would have been able to read. This was specifically because there were still plenty of white Southerners in poverty that wouldn't have been able to read. So this was just helping them get around that. This was just explicit racism in terms of polling. So, 1890s, we had segregation spreading through the South just by law. These various laws are known colloquially as Jim Crow laws, which was named after a minstrel show character, which was a white person wearing blackface, because of course. And the purpose of this was separating white and black Americans in public facilities. In 1883, the Supreme Court struck down the Civil Rights Act, so the state governments in the South could do more with how they treated their citizens, and again, specifically the African American citizens. Therefore, schools, transportation seats, hospital beds, and even graveyard sections would be segregated, because you don't want the ghost of your racist grandpa to be buried next to a black person. Oh no. Like, what? So, 1896, we had the Supreme Court sanctioning Jim Crow officially in Plessy v. Ferguson, where they stated that equal but separate was constitutional. Though in the same ruling, they stated, if one race be inferior to the other socially, the Constitution of the United States cannot put them on the same plane. So, like, where do you get equal from? And obviously, say, having separate facilities or whatever and keeping them equal almost never happened. And of course, for African Americans who decided that, hey, this sucks, maybe we should do something about it, between 1884 and 1900, 1,700 African Americans were lynched, which is to say, murdered by mobs. because you can't have. Did I mention the government in, I think it was North Carolina or Virginia, that like had a black city council, or mostly black city council, and so there was a bunch of racist white people that just like overthrew it because they couldn't have the idea of anyone in power being black. And it was, obviously during this time period. So yeah. Anyway, let's let's look at some separate but equal examples. So here's a few. Real good example of separate but equal here. Real equal. Yes. Correct. Oh, it's always been a thing. Yep. Yep. Um, it was like everybody but Anglo Americans. Um, Italian Americans, Irish were treated in the same way. Like, oh, you're Irish, you can't come in here. We can't have in the same, literally the same level as dogs. We can't have beasts in our restaurant. Um, and to quote my professor, who does a lot of Irish historical work, it wasn't until the Irish and Italians became racist that they were accepted into the Anglo-American fold. Hispanics and African Americans largely, yes. Because obviously, it wasn't until like the '60s that we had like the civil rights movement. Because yeah, we have the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments that clearly didn't do anything. There's no equal rights going on, and these things are being struck down by the courts. And the states are allowed to do whatever they want, barring actual return to slavery. Asterisk convict labor. So yeah, but yeah, the Hispanics, as I mentioned last chapter, the Californios who had been living in the Western United States, Western North America, since before Jamestown existed. When American interest got that far, they were treated as a subclass. I'm seeing a lot of repeats happening. Yeah, there's literally there's the poem of they came for this group, but they weren't me, so I'm not worried about it until there's nobody left. Yeah, 100%. They came for the communists, but I didn't do anything because I wasn't communist. And they came for the Jews, and I didn't do anything because I'm not Jewish. And then they came for me, and it's like, and there was no one else to stand up because they were all gone. Yeah, yeah, precisely. And we'll touch more on this next chapter, but I don't want to get too I don't want to get in too much trouble here. But it's always been about class and not race. Like, while there were these things where it's like, oh, well, we're going to make it so that the poor white people do have some voice, that was to split the poor whites and the poor blacks. Because if they work together, then the rich people at the top will be the minority, and they will be the ones in trouble. So that's what any of this was about. But yeah, class consciousness would help. Because there's a whole lot more people who aren't billionaires than there are billionaires. And it's weird how much power the ones with the money have. But, you know. But yeah, racism, I mean, it's always been a thing, but it's just that it's used as a crux to, or as a wedge issue, I should say, to get the poor people on your side that are at least like you. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking. So yeah, again, we have the water fountains here. This is one that, again, separate but equal, question mark, where I guess separate is you can go somewhere else. And that's also something that we've seen in recent days, well, in the last few years. Not even about race, but like the whole LGBTQ community, and be like, oh, well, I disagree, therefore we're not going to serve them. It's just this again. It's just, oh, well, they can go somewhere else. But we've seen this before. And then we have some Jim Crow laws here, which again, I just pulled at random. But they're really petty. Unlawful for a Negro and a white person to play together or in company with each other any game of cards or dice, dominoes or checkers. Like, why? Why? What? You're afraid that? I guess I kind of get, like, if it's a game of cards and they're betting money and, oh no, the white man loses and he's going to get all pissy about it. Sure, but like, I see a game of cards or dice, I'm thinking people like sitting on the sidewalk, like goofing around. Unlawful for any white prisoner to be handcuffed or otherwise chained or tied to a Negro prisoner. Again, we're in prison, but we're going to make it so that at least the white prisoners feel like they're not at the bottom of the barrel, because it's again this attempt to push people apart within the same class. And then again, oh no, what if a barber with melanin in his skin gives a white girl a haircut? Oh, the scandal. And this was 1926. I mean, granted, this was 1930. So, like, this one's 1903. This one's closer to what we're talking about. But, I mean, these are post-World War I. This stuff lasted a while. Yes, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Probably. I can imagine that they would, like, have separate parts of the jail for separate prisoners, because, oh, we can't let the black prisoners be near the white prisoners. I mean, I would assume based on that second one. I mean, this is like specifically, handcuffed together, but I imagine, at least back then, the prisons were a bit more segregated. All right, let's get to the last section, which is less depressing. Also, not quite as interesting, but it's important to just get an idea of where politics were during this time period. And as the book puts it, great men rose to lead corporations, unaspiring men went to the presidency. That's one reason, and also because I'm not really an American historian, so I don't super care about the presidents until pretty much Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know any of the presidents between Grant and Roosevelt, well, I guess Tilden, not Tilden, Hayes, because we talked about Hayes. But, like, Hayes didn't do anything. He was completely unimportant. And I don't remember anybody in between because they weren't they weren't important. Um, and especially due to Johnson's impeachment, the power of the presidency had been curtailed. So, like, the president didn't really do much. He was there. He was important politically. If the book mentions that the presidents were typically hard workers, honest, they were often Union generals that served during the Civil War, but they weren't inspiring men that people talk about. I mean, again, I only know McKinley because he died, and therefore Teddy Roosevelt was able to become president. Because what did McKinley do? Nah, he died. That's what he did. Also, not much was happening in Congress. Absolute inaction in Congress. The House and Senate were typically controlled by opposing parties, and even within both the House and the Senate, the numbers were so were so close that not much got done. Also, the congressmen were very unruly back then. I mean, I know it's like, yeah, well, how different is that from today? They would get into physical fights on the regular. And I think the one Thomas Sumner was pre-Civil War, but there was a South Carolina senator who beat, I want to say, a Massachusetts senator with his cane until the cane broke. And by cane, I mean like shillelagh. It was basically a club. He put this man in serious condition. And that was sort of normal. And a cabinet official at the time complained, you can't use tact with a congressman. A congressman is a hog. You must take a stick and hit him on the snout. Which, like, you know. I wrote this in, like, 2014. I swear things weren't as insane as they are today, but it's still relevant. So despite the fact that, like, nothing was really happening on the federal level, people were still pretty energized when it came to politics, or at the very least entertained. Campaigns began looking like stage performance. Candidates use their speeches to arouse the passions and prejudices of their audiences, which, again, I wrote this prior to 2016. It's just always been like that. Bipartisanship would draw on region, religion, and just people disliking the other guy. And even with all the party loyalty, the parties themselves tended to remain divided. So, middle, not much happened in politics in this time. Which is part of the reason why the corporations were able to get as powerful as they were. Because the few government policies that were put in place, like the Sherman Antitrust Act, were just ignored. Because the government wasn't doing anything about it. We have this image that sums it up pretty well. You have large businessman here. I don't take any stock in this silly nonsense about working for anybody's good but our own. When we make a move, we do it because it's in our interest to do so. I always find the anti-monopolists come the cheapest. And here you have Congress and the House of Representatives on leashes, and just Uncle Sam Eagle here underfoot. Because, I mean, that was kind of what was, the businesses were in charge. Which I know is hard to imagine where, big corporations are running the government. Can you imagine that? Yeah. And then the title here, The Public Be Damned. Because who cares about the little people? They don't have the money to do anything about it. And again, this was before Citizens United. This was before corporations had the power to basically buy elections. So here we have just your general local political gathering. You've got the guy up here giving a speech in the window. Reminds me of Hancock and Fallout 4, if you're familiar with that. And everybody down here is having a great time. Some people are already drunk, because anything's an excuse to get drunk. There's dogs running around, which I'm always about. And then we have some of the nominees here: W.J. Bryan and Arthur Sewell. And again, like, one of the big issues of this era was about whether we should stay on the gold standard or move to the silver standard. Who cares? But that was the huge thing, was should we have gold as our standard for money or move to silver, because gold's expensive and it's causing things to cost more, but if we move to silver then it'll debase our currency and blah 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 economics. And I can't make myself care. Now, granted, there's McKinley and Roosevelt. The administration's promises have been kept. The American flag has not been planted on foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake, which is bullshit. But we'll talk about that specifically later, where the American takeover of Cuba and how great that was for everybody involved. And Cuba totally still loves us today because of this. Again, the real issue is coinage. I do not know what you think about it, but I believe it is a good deal better to open up the mills of the United States to the labor of America than to open up the mints of the United States to the silver of the world. I don't know, man. I guess. I mean, having foreign investors send silver to the U.S. is probably good. Why can't we also have mills be open to labor? I don't know. Again, it's real nitpicky economic stuff that I don't super get, and this was the real issue at the time. Nobody really cared. So, that's it for chapter 16. Lots of industrial progress in the U.S. The business tycoons became obscenely wealthy. The working class saw very little of this. However, the culture of the day promised them that, if they just worked harder, they will be able to be super rich too. And that culture continued well into the modern day. All you gotta do is work harder and you could be super rich too, for reals. Don't worry about the fact that basically everyone who has money was born into it. It's fine, don't worry about it. A small loan of $1 million. And the individualism, or at least the idea of individualism, was replaced by organization, and technically laissez-faire replaced government aid, but when it came to corporations, they got both. They could make sure that their workers didn't get government aid because that would hurt them slightly in the long run, but they would get government aid to help them immediately because corporations are two-faced. So yeah, that's chapter 16. As I said, we're done early. Not early enough that I would try to do the study guide today. But like I said, we'll do that Wednesday, and we'll be ready for the test next week. Any questions before I let you guys go? Yes. All the PowerPoint should be up there, as well as the study guide. And I've got it with all the images, but I realized that the way that the PowerPoint viewer works, you can't move the images without actually downloading PowerPoint. And used to, you would get Microsoft Office when you got a Windows PC, but that's been gone a long time. So I'm going to go through and probably re-upload the PowerPoints in a format that you can more easily access through Blackboard. So you'll be able to see all of that. The study guide isn't something you need to fill out on your own before we come to class. It's there so you can go ahead and look it over and have an idea of what we're going to be doing, and we'll fill it out in class. So yeah, that's all I got. I'll see y'all on Wednesday.